The Pentagon senior climate advisor Joe Bryan says climate change costs defense resources and readiness. The Pentagon wants to approach climate change by increasing resilience and security. John Conger is director of the Center for Climate and Security. He's former Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller. John, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much.
What would you say are the biggest costs to DoD and the impact to readiness as a result of climate change?
So the biggest costs that they've seen so far are the impacts to infrastructure. You've seen hurricane damage, you've seen flooding damage, there's impacts from wildfires. All of those things carry price tags. And so the bills that the Pentagon is facing in the immediate term or in the near term are the aftermath of natural disasters.
There are about 1,700 military installations that are along coastlines that could be affected by rising sea levels and, hurricanes, obviously. What should DoD do about that?
So in the immediate term, DoD needs to make its infrastructure more resilient. It needs to climate-proof, climate-ready that infrastructure, climate-proof its operations. And so as we anticipate more and bigger storms, or with sea level rise, even a smaller storm will have a significant impact on the installation. You have to be ready for that. You have to be ready to deal with the future. And in the same way that we're getting ready for the future of military operations, you have to get ready for the future environment. And that means resilience.
The Pentagon has been working on climate-related initiatives. What has their progress been? Where have you seen the biggest issues?
Well, they're getting started. I think they're in the planning stage right now. They've gotten, if you look at the executive order that came out in January, that was a plan to plan. It said, here are all the plans we need, and so go do it. And so the Pentagon has been working on those. They're going to come out with an adaptation plan very soon. Sustainability plan is going to be coming out. A climate risk assessment is going to be coming out. All of these things they've been working on to support the future budget requests and so on and so forth. And so they've been doing a lot of homework. That's going to influence the next 3 years of budgeting and the next 3 years of operations. But they've been doing their thinking, and it's a smart thing to do, right? You want to proceed with ready, aim, fire, not ready, fire, aim.
No, definitely, we want to do that first. But John, what do you do with all those bases? Is it feasible to maybe move them inland, or how does that work? How do you protect those bases from climate change, the effects of climate change?
I would be careful about talking about moving bases all too much. First of all, you run into BRAC, base realignment and closure rules in that context. Should you take climate impacts and the utility of the base and the capability of the base into account when you're placing new missions? Sure. But closing a base based on a future climate impact and storm risk is probably not the right course of action. That's billions of dollars of costs. I think that in the medium to far term, as you see more and more climate impacts, you might want to start thinking about it then. But if you look at the infrastructure across all of DoD bases today, we didn't have half the bases we have today 100 years ago. So how we're going to predict what bases we're going to need in the second half of this century, it's going to be based on requirements and capabilities and the various military systems we have then. And so I wouldn't want to prejudge that, and I wouldn't want to jump the gun.
Let's talk about the timeline, John. How long do you think it will take to get these bases and installations fully protected? And how does that timeline affect military readiness?
So I don't think there's a threshold for when you're fully protected. It's all about varying degrees of risk. So as we contemplate the need to prepare for bigger storms, the need to deal with flooding and sea level rise, for example, you want to be thinking about what your biggest vulnerabilities are and what your biggest priorities are, and you're going to start working down that list. They need to build that list first. And so I'll give you an example. In a couple years ago, Congress asked the Navy to build a plan for shipyard infrastructure. And they went through and made a $20 billion 20-year plan of what they want to invest in their shipyards. Well, one of the first projects on that list, it wasn't a climate change study, but one of the first projects on that list was that the dry docks in Norfolk were too low for sea level rise, and they were putting their $2 billion submarines at risk when they cut them open to do maintenance. And so they needed to lift those flood walls, and so they programmed a project for $49 million a couple of years ago to make those flood walls higher to protect their submarines. So they're going to have to do the homework, do the study, figure out their vulnerability, figure out what their biggest risks are, and then execute the projects. And so they'll do the most important ones first, once they've figured out what they are. And then they'll work down that list.
All right.
So again, it's a dial.
All right. Sounds good, John. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thanks for having me.